Mountains have a strange reputation in Japan. Places where people disappear. Places where strange things are heard in the trees. And sometimes places where you hear voices that shouldn't exist. Tonight's stories all come from your suggestions. Encounters with yokai, cursed objects, and things that are much harder to explain, like the toilet dragon. If you enjoy strange stories like these, consider subscribing. And tonight's first one begins during a storm, with rain pouring down through a mountain forest, and a children's song echoing through the trees. Here's the bells. This didn't happen to me. It's something my dad experienced when he was young. Back when he was in university, he was part of a mountaineering club, so he was out climbing pretty often. On that day, he and one of the younger members were hiking a mountain they were planning to climb properly later on, just to scout out the route in advance. The mountain was an inactive volcano, and the crater area had become a forest. They were just about to reach the forest when the weather changed without warning. The sky darkened, the wind shifted, and from somewhere thunder started cracking. A little too close by. Not off in the distance either. Close. So close he said that he could almost feel it in his chest before the sound finished rolling through the mountain. The two of them stopped and tried to decide on what to do next. One option was to wait it out in the forest until the lightning stopped, and the other was to head back down the mountain as fast as they could. But looking at the sky and listening to the thunder getting worse instead of better, they figured that the weather was only going to keep turning against them further. So they decided to go back down. They were terrified of getting struck by lightning, and once they started moving, it turned into a desperate run through heavy rain. They threw caution to the wind and tried to push downhill through the downpour, soaked through almost immediately, their boots slipping, breath tearing out of them. They didn't care though, they just needed as much distance as possible between themselves and the exposed slope. By the time they finally stopped, both of them were completely drained. Partway down the trail, they found a spot where a large rock jutted outward, with a hollow space beneath it. Not quite a cave, like a shallow recess in the stone. The kind of place that gave at least a little cover if you pressed yourself against the wall of it. Seen from the side, my dad said it looked something a little like an upside-down corner, like a hard shelf of rock with a pocket underneath. It seemed good enough. They weren't full of options, so they ducked in there to rest for a moment. They were beyond tired by that point. Too worn out to talk, they leaned back against the stone wall and just sat there, staring out at the rain as it kept falling. Water hammered the leaves, ran down the rock face in thin streams, and hit the ground in a constant rush. The whole mountainside felt blurred by it. The air smelled of wet soil. Then, after a while, my dad heard something. Actually, two things. Two things that had no business being there. And in weather like that, they should never have been audible at all. The first was the sound of children singing Kagome Kagome. The second was a little girl's voice that came right after it. "Why are you in a place like this?" My dad told himself that there was no way children would be up there. Not on that mountain, not in that weather. So he tried to brush it off. He figured maybe exhaustion had gotten to him. Maybe the storm, the altitude, the stress of running downhill in that thunderstorm. Maybe his ears were playing tricks on him. Still, just in case, he asked the junior climber with him. "Hey, did you, hear something just now?" The younger guy looked a little startled, but he said, "Yeah, I did." and that was enough to make my dad's rain-soaked skin go even colder. He asked him what he heard, just to verify, and the answer that came back was, just a whole bunch of kids singing Kagome Kagome. The two of them got out of there not long after that, without waiting for the rain to fully stop. Hi, Jay here. Kagome Kagome is an old children's song that goes with a circle game. One child crouches in the middle, the others walk around them singing, and when the song stops, the child in the center has to guess who's behind them. Simple enough, right? But like a lot of old nursery songs, nobody really agrees on what it means. Over time it picked up all kinds of darker interpretations. Some say it's about a prisoner awaiting execution, miscarriage, buried treasure, even ritual summoning. Some people believe that the game itself has an occult structure to it. One person sat in the center, everyone else surrounding them singing while they turn. A spirit calling ritual, with the child in the center acting as a kind of vessel. Maybe that's just urban legend though. But if you heard children singing it in the middle of a mountain storm, I don't know if you'd be too interested in the innocent explanation. One night I had a strange dream. I was in an izakaya. Not the small neighborhood kind either. The place was enormous. The room stretched far beyond what you'd expect from a bar. Long rows of tables filled the space, and every one of them was occupied. The place was completely packed, but something about it felt off immediately. Everyone had their heads lowered while they drank. Every single person. No one looked up. Because of that, I couldn't make out a single face. Men and women were mixed throughout the room. Maybe about half and half. Some sat in groups, others alone, and they were doing the same thing, lifting their drinks and lowering them again. No one spoke, not even quietly. A full izakaya, that size, should have been loud. Conversations, laughter, the sounds of plates, glasses clinking, staff welcoming in customers, things like that. Instead, there was only the faint noise of glass touching wood and the occasional swallow, even though no one was drinking. That was it. One other thing began to bother me after a moment. Every table had drinks on it. Beer mugs, highballs, sake cups, exactly what you might expect in a crowded place like that, but none of the liquid levels changed. People kept raising their glasses and tilting them back as if they were drinking, yet the drinks never went down. The glasses stayed full. The longer I watched, the stranger it felt. I remember thinking, the hell is this? And right then I woke up. I checked the clock beside my bed, 1:30 a.m. I'd gone to sleep around 1, so maybe 30 minutes had passed. Man, that was a weird dream. I turned over and tried to fall asleep again. I ended up drifting off. And guess what? I was right back there. The same izakaya. The same packed room. Everyone still drinking, with their heads lowered. This time something was different though. I understood that I was dreaming. The strange awareness people sometimes have inside dreams was there. I remember thinking, why is this dream? Then another thought crossed my mind. Maybe I should go around and kick one of them. The moment that amusing thought formed, I woke up again, and I looked at the clock. 1:40 a.m. Only 10 minutes had passed. That kind of bothered me more than the dream itself. Still, I had to get to work early the next morning, so I pulled the blanket up and forced myself to relax. And the dream came back again. I was back in that same izakaya, the same crowded room, but this time something had changed. 4, maybe 5 of the people had lifted their heads, and they were looking straight at me. The moment I saw their faces, a cold feeling ran straight through my body. Because their skin was bright red, and it wasn't from the effects of alcohol, it was red like burned flesh. The skin looked swollen and raw, like someone who had been caught in a fire. Their expressions were twisted in pain, mouths slightly open, eyes strained. They didn't say anything. Instead, they slowly reached their hands towards me, and this moment was weak and desperate, like someone reaching out while drowning. And that's when I noticed something else. The drinks sitting in front of them were still untouched. Their hands stretched towards me, and right before their fingers reached me, I woke up, and the clock read 2 a.m. After that, I just gave up on trying to sleep. I got out of bed, went to the living room, and sat with a cup of coffee. The apartment was silent. No cars passed outside. They didn't even bother turning the TV on. Just the ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator kept me company. Every time I closed my eyes, I just saw those red faces again. If I went back to sleep, I'm sure they would be waiting for me. So I stayed awake, or at least I tried to. At around 5 in the morning, I must have drifted off without realizing it. And when the dream returned, I wasn't in the izakaya anymore. I was standing outside on the street. In front of me was a building. Smoke poured out of the windows, thick black smoke spilling upward into the early morning sky. And then my body locked up. I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis. I tried to turn my head and lift my arms, even opened my mouth, but nothing responded. The smoke kept pouring from the windows. For a moment my chest tightened, like the air around me had turned dry, like I was breathing in air that had already been burned once. Then I woke up, and I swear, for a couple of seconds I smelled smoke. I have never been so afraid in my life as I was in that moment. I ended up calling in sick and I didn't go to work. Later that evening, the news reported a fire in Utamachi. And when they showed the footage on TV, the camera focused on the upper floors, smoke pouring out of the windows, exactly the same view I had seen in the dream. To me, seeing that setting from my nightmare was just utterly horrifying. I have to keep telling myself that maybe it was just a coincidence, though. I don't really know. But I've never had that dream again. Though every once in a while, I remember that izakaya, full of people drinking in silence. And I wonder if I saw something that was about to happen, without knowing it. Recently I heard someone talking about elderly people dying, about lonely deaths in big cities. For some reason that reminded me of something from my childhood, and once that memory came back I couldn't sleep, so I figured I'd come here and write it down. This is about the time I saw something called Osagami-sama. When I was a kid, both of my parents worked full-time. Because of that, I often ended up spending afternoons in the house of a man who lived nearby. I called him Uncle Masato, even though he wasn't exactly my uncle. We weren't related at all. We just happened to meet one day at the local park, and after that I started stopping by his place to hang out. Masato had lost his fiancée to illness years earlier, and had lived alone ever since. Maybe because of that he treated me kindly. I remember how he used to talk with me, listen to whatever nonsense a kid had to say, and sometimes let me help with small things around the house. Thinking back now, he treated me almost like I was his own child. One day, while we were sitting around talking, he suddenly said something strange, quietly, almost to himself. He said, Osagami-sama would be coming soon. According to him, Osagami-sama was a yokai. It was about the height of a child. It had long hair and narrow eyes, and it never spoke. Instead, it simply followed people. If you ran, it ran. If you turned corner after corner trying to lose it, it would still be there. Each time you looked back, it would be closer than before. If you shouted at it to stop following you, it would just stare back without changing its expression. But if you tried approaching it yourself, something strange would happen. It would move away, always keeping the exact same distance, no matter how much you tried to close that distance. I asked him, what would happen if it caught up to you? He said that he didn't know. Apparently, Osagami-sama never approached people who had families. Most of the people around Masato were either married or had children, so nobody he knew had actually seen it. At least that's what he said. Then he looked around the room for a moment and said something that stuck with me. Right now it's probably nearby, he said. Since you're here, it's hiding. I glanced around. I have to admit I was genuinely freaked out. The small living room looked exactly the same as always. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. I could hear the faint sound of a bicycle passing somewhere down the street and the dry rustling of leaves in the roadside gutter. And I didn't see anything. At the time, the story only felt like a creepy ghost tale, but by the time I got home, the fear had almost faded. I remember thinking that maybe he had just been teasing me. A few days later, I went back to visit him again, and that was when things started to feel wrong. Masato was standing there, in his yard, when I arrived. He was shaking, not just slightly either. His whole body was trembling, like someone standing out in the cold too long. I walked up to him and I called out. The moment he noticed me, he turned with a look I've never seen on his face before, and screamed. He stumbled backwards several steps, staring at me like he was looking at something dangerous. But then he realized it was me. He calmed down a little, though the tension never really left him. His eyes kept drifting past me toward the street and the narrow path between the houses. Under his breath, he kept repeating the same thing. Osagami-sama's coming. Osagami-sama's coming. When I tried to talk with him, he told me he'd already gone to both temples and shrines. None of them could help him. He said he was certain he would be caught by it that night. As a kid, I was trying to think of ways to help. What if he stayed at somebody else's house? What if he slept somewhere crowded? But he told me the people he knew didn't believe in Osagami-sama. Even if he stayed somewhere without explaining why, he could only manage a night or two before questions started. And there was nothing I could do either. There was no way a child like me could suddenly invite a grown man to stay at my house. And even if I asked my parents to let me stay at his place, they would never allow me to sleep over at the home of a man who wasn't even my relative. I actually tried. I called them to ask, and they said no immediately. Before long, evening arrived, and I had to go home. Masato seemed to understand that, and with a tired smile, he said everything would be fine, and he told me, "Don't worry, go on home." But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. After my parents fell asleep, I quietly slipped out of the house and walked over to Masato's place. The front door was closed, so I went toward the yard, hoping to see inside, and that's when I noticed a small gap in the curtains. I leaned forward and looked through. Inside the room, Masato was lying down, and something else was there. Osagami-sama. It looked exactly like how he described it. Long hair, narrow eyes. Its height was slightly shorter than mine at the time, but because the room was dark, I couldn't make out every detail. But it didn't seem to be wearing clothes. It was sitting on top of Masato's body. The creature had a faint smile on its face, as if it was enjoying itself. And Masato wasn't moving at all. I could see his face clearly, but there was no sign that he was conscious. A terrible feeling rushed through me, and without thinking, I started pounding on the window and shouting his name. But the only one who reacted was Osagami-sama. Slowly it turned its head towards me, and for a brief second it just stared. Then it moved. It rushed towards the curtain with incredible speed. The expression on its face had completely changed. The smile was gone, and in its place was something filled with pure hatred, an expression so twisted, it's hard to describe even now. So I ran. I backed away from the window, stumbled through the yard, and sprinted towards the street. Right as I reached the road, a police officer on a patrol grabbed me, and from his point of view, it must have looked like a child busting out of someone's yard in the middle of the night. He grabbed my arm and started demanding explanations. By then I was half hysterical. I remember shouting things like, "Osagami-sama" and "Masato." The officer took me back to Masato's house. He rang the doorbell, but there was no response. Because I kept insisting about the yard, he took me around there as well. Nothing. Of course, he didn't look through the window like I had. He probably assumed I had been playing a prank at a neighbor's house, and eventually he took me back home. That night, my parents scolded me so harshly, and I barely slept. I just kept thinking about Masato and what I had seen through the window. The next morning, the same officer came round to our house. Masato had been found dead. They said the cause was unclear. The officer described the body in a strange way. He said it looked as if all of the man's vitality had been drained of him. Apparently the officer had remembered how strangely I had behaved the night before, so he stopped by the house again that morning just to check. And that's when they discovered the body. I told him everything that happened. How much of it he believed, I still don't know. Even now, I can't say whether Osagami-sama really existed. Maybe Masato had simply been losing his mind. Maybe I imagined what I saw. It was late, wasn't it? And I'd been told this story, and I was young. But one thing that's never faded is the memory of that thing rushing towards the window with that expression. I can still see that very clearly in my mind. The only comforting thought is that I eventually grew up and built a happy family of my own. Because, according to Masato, my friend from the park, Osagami-sama doesn't approach people who have families. When I was in high school, I found money on the side of the road. Not a few loose coins either. It was about 50 500 yen coins. That's 25,000 yen, which is a crazy amount of money for a high school kid to find back in the day. Hi, Jay here. That's over $150 by today's standards, so when OP was in high school, chances are it was a hell of a lot more. Back to the story. The strange part was how they were scattered. They weren't inside a wallet or a bag. They were just spread out along the roadside, starting near the intersection close to my house, continuing along the river path, and ending near a park about 2 kilometers away. Just small clusters of coins here and there, like someone had dropped them one by one while walking, or thrown them away. Back then I was a broke high school student, so to me that money felt like a sudden windfall. Now these days I'd probably think it might be connected to some kind of incident and call the police. But the version of me back then wasn't exactly the model citizen. So I kept the money. I used it slowly, buying a game, paying for food, and I went out with friends. Small things like that. I stretched it out for a while. Eventually, the last coin was gone. The very next day I woke up feeling terrible. My body felt heavy, like all the joints had stiffened overnight. My throat hurt. Even breathing felt irritating. I tried to sit up, but my head throbbed. A little while later, my bedroom door slammed open, and my mother stood there, with a kind of expression that usually meant that someone was about to get dragged out of bed. "Why are you still sleeping? Get up and go to school." But the moment she stepped closer and saw my face, her expression changed. She leaned over the bed. "What's wrong with you? Do you have a fever?" "Yeah." "Why didn't you say so earlier? What if it gets worse?" "Mom, please don't yell at me. My head really hurts." "Honestly, wait there. I'll get you some medicine." "Thanks." It's funny how mothers suddenly become kind the moment their kids get sick. It would be nice if that version of them showed up more often. Jokes aside, the next 3 days were brutal. My fever stayed close to around 40 degrees. I couldn't keep food down. Even drinking water made me throw up. And eventually I was taken to the hospital. They ran tests, but they couldn't find any clear cause, and I stayed in overnight for observation. Then the fever disappeared almost instantly, just like that. Even the doctor looked puzzled. But since my temperature had returned to normal, they discharged me and sent me on my way the next day. My mother came to pick me up, and as we drove away from the hospital, she asked, "What do you want to eat for lunch?" Right when I was about to answer, "Oh, anything's fine," a truck from the opposite lane swerved towards us. My mother ended up with 3 broken ribs. My injuries were worse. My right arm was an open fracture. My right knee's ACL was torn. My right tibia was also shattered. So, I went straight back into the hospital. While I was recovering, things kept getting worse, one after another. My mum was diagnosed with a serious illness, and my grandfather, who had been perfectly healthy, collapsed suddenly. Our house even caught fire. My girlfriend broke up with me. It felt like misfortune had started lining up and taking its turns, body bagging me. At one point, my grandmother panicked and started shouting, "It's a curse! A curse!" Looking back now, that memory is almost kind of funny, but at the time I started feeling uneasy too. Too many things had gone wrong in such a short amount of time. So my family arranged for a purification ritual. There was a temple that had taken care of our family graves for generations, and the head priest there had known our family for a very long time, and he agreed to perform a cleansing. The priest didn't say much during the ritual. He looked very serious. He simply carried it out calmly, finishing the prayers and purification without any dramatic gestures. When it was over, he pushed me in my wheelchair over to the temple gate, and just before I left, he muttered something quietly. "Tell me, what did you pick up then?" I turned in my chair. "What?" He smiled slightly. "You shouldn't pick up lost items so casually." He spoke in a calm, almost conversational tone. "There's an old custom," he continued. "When someone wants to cast off misfortune, they intentionally leave something behind. Money, jewelry, anything. The idea is that the bad luck attached to them falls away with the object, and whoever picks it up becomes the substitute." He paused. "Well, it doesn't look like anything strange is attached to you now. But you've taken on some bad luck. It could continue for about a year, so just be as careful as you can." After saying that, the priest turned and disappeared deeper into the temple. Before that day, I never believed much in ghosts and curses. But after everything that happened, I started thinking maybe there was something to all those old ideas. Just a little. Oh, and by the way, the reason I'm writing this down is because yesterday I found a diamond ring in my workplace. I left it somewhere obvious so the owner could find it. Hopefully they notice. Have you ever heard of a game called Paradox? It's a Famicom game, so nowadays it would be considered a retro title. Back when I was growing up, there was a strange rumor attached to it. Nothing unusual happens when you're actually playing the game, but the moment you turn the power off, strange things begin to happen. At least that's what people in my hometown used to say. In my hometown, Paradox was fairly well known actually. So when I moved to Tokyo and mentioned it to people, I was surprised that nobody had heard of it. Even when I checked the usual horror forums, the kind that collect creepy experiences, there wasn't a single mention of the game. I tried searching online, typing Paradox Famicom game into search engines, but nothing came up. No screenshots, no catalog entries, no record of the game ever existing. At first I assumed it must have been some kind of foreign release, but as I got older, I started asking friends who were much deeper into gaming culture than I was, real otaku types, the kind of people who could identify obscure cartridges just from a blurry photo, and every one of them told me the same thing. I've never heard of that game, I've never seen it, and I've never played it. After hearing that, my curiosity only grew. Eventually, I even asked someone with connections to an investigation agency to look into it. Through them, I finally learned something interesting. Apparently, the game wasn't commercial at all. It had been made in the 1990s by a group of hobbyists, members of a local otaku circle, who spent most of their time hanging around a game arcade. They produced it themselves. At first it was sold casually from a wagon display inside the arcade. Despite that, the game apparently became extremely popular with local elementary school kids. At one point, it was said to even rival Pokemon in popularity. But eventually a problem emerged. Some children began suffering from bedwetting after playing it. Somehow the game was blamed for that. Parents grew concerned. The complaints escalated, and before long the game's distribution was stopped entirely. Until recently, that's where the story sort of ended. But a few months ago, I finally got my hands on a copy. I obtained it through one of my otaku friends. Apparently a well-known collector had put his entire game library up for auction, and Paradox was hidden among the items. It wasn't cheap. The seller knew exactly what he had. In the end, it cost me about 500,000 yen, just over $3,000. When I actually played the game, the content itself was surprisingly straightforward. It's just a simple RPG. You gather companions as you progress, solving urban legends and supernatural mysteries, things like the Seven School Mystery, or encounters with figures similar to Kuchisake-onna, the slit-mouthed woman. Classic Japanese horror material. The protagonist is a girl who resembles a yokai named Joro-gumo, a spider spirit that takes the form of a woman. Using psychic-like abilities, she brainwashes classmates and monsters alike, turning them into allies. For a fan-made game from that era, the pacing is surprisingly smooth, but the thing that really caught my attention was one particular monster. There's a creature in the game that strongly resembles Hashaka-sama, the tall woman spirit. That surprised me. Hashaka-sama didn't become widely known until much later. When I asked my otaku friend to look into it, he told me that similar tall woman spirits actually appear in older Showa-era ghost stories, so it isn't completely impossible that someone in the 90s could have used that idea. But what interested me most wasn't the game itself, it was what happened after I finished playing it. Because the rumors were true. Strange things started happening. No, I didn't wet the bed. At first, it was just a feeling, a constant sense that someone was watching me. Not just one person, not even two. It felt like around 7 people were watching me at all times, no matter where I was. If that had been all, I could have probably ignored it over time, I imagine, but eventually, something else began happening. Those watchers started appearing in my dreams. In the dream, I would be sitting there playing Paradox again. But in the next room over, I could hear voices. 7 people. I always knew it was 7 people for some reason. Talking among themselves, laughing. Each time I had that dream, I could hear more of their conversation. Eventually, I realized something unsettling. They sounded like the people who created the game, the same otaku circle that were responsible for Paradox. Then one day the dream stopped, completely. No more watchers, no more voices. I didn't have that strange feeling of being observed or watched anymore. And the timing of that change is another thing that slightly bothers me, to be honest, because it happened right after I met 7 people at Comiket, a huge marketplace for non-published works that around 35,000 people attend each year. I met these 3 men and 4 women by pure chance, and we got along surprisingly well, and we started hanging out together. Now that I think about it, the figures in my dream were also 7 people, weren't they? I wonder if there's some connection. I still don't know what those dreams really were, but ever since I made those 7 friends, my luck has really improved. Life has started going better for me. Every day feels much more fulfilling somehow. One of the 7 friends eventually moved overseas to study, so we drifted apart a little, but since I joined them, our group still has 7 members. I don't know much about curses or spiritual matters, but maybe the idea is something like this. If the other side has 7 otaku, then our side needs 7 too. Maybe that's all there is to it. I mean, people always say that living humans are stronger than spirits, right? Maybe that's the answer? The 7 of us are close, almost like we share the same mind. With the 7 of us together, it feels like nothing could beat us. And lately, we've been really into exploring haunted locations. Sometimes we go hiking together too. It's been a lot of fun. Hi, Jay here. One reader pointed out something interesting. The group of 7 watching spirits strongly resembles a famous Japanese ghost legend called 7 Misaki. 7 Misaki are said to be a group of wandering spirits. In many versions of the legend, when somebody encounters them, the victim becomes the 8th spirit and replaces one of the 7, which might explain why the dreams stopped once the narrator found a group of 7 people. Hey, he may have unknowingly taken someone's place, but he seems pretty happy about it. When you were a kid, wasn't it scary waking up in the middle of the night, needing the toilet? For me, it definitely was. I was such a coward about it that I'd always wake my mum up and make her come with me. Sometimes her hair or her pajamas would be all messed up, and she'd be in a bad mood when I woke her. Looking back now, I can guess that it was probably because of adult circumstances. My younger sister is only 3 years younger than me, after all. Anyway, even someone like me grows up eventually. I got married, and before long we had a kid, a son. He was unbelievably cute. When I picked him up and tried to calm him down, he'd grin at me, like everything in the world was fine. Listen, kids grow up ridiculously fast too. It feels like just yesterday I was changing his nappies. My wife started toilet training him, and honestly it went suspiciously well, almost too well, and then it hit me. Sooner or later, he'd start waking us up in the night to take him to the toilet. But strangely enough, that never happened. Not once. I even asked my wife if he'd ever woken her up, and she said no. At the time, I just figured he might be the kind of kid who sleeps deeply and doesn't need the toilet at night. But that wasn't it. I realized the truth shortly after he turned 3. One night, I got home late from a drinking party with my coworkers. My wife and son were already asleep, and the house was completely dark. I'd picked up some extra snacks and drinks from the convenience store on the way home, so I stayed up a little longer in the living room. After a while, I heard a clatter from the bedroom, so I looked down the hallway. The sliding door slowly opened. For a moment, I thought my wife had woken up and she was about to yell at me, because she really hates it when I get drunk. But it wasn't her. It was my son. Without turning on any lights, he walked across the hallway and went straight into the toilet. I could hear him muttering something in there. After a while, the toilet flushed and he came back out and walked into the bedroom and closed the sliding door. He didn't seem to notice me at all. When I peeked inside afterwards, both my wife and my son were completely asleep. The next day I took him to the park to ride bikes. While we were resting, I remembered what had happened, and I asked him about it. "Hey," I said, "you can go to the toilet at night by yourself? That's impressive. Don't you ever get scared?" And he looked at me like I'd just asked something weird. "Huh? No, not at all. There's always a dragon in the toilet." I stared at him. "A dragon? In the toilet?" "Yeah. You know the water tank just behind the toilet? It's always sitting on top of that." I asked what it looked like. "It's just a small white dragon," he said. At first, I asked if it was a snake, but it told me it was a dragon. That part gave me a strange feeling because, according to him, it answered him. I asked how big it was. I spread my arms wide to show about a meter. "Like this?" He shook his head. "No, more like this." And he held his hands apart only about 20 centimeters. "When I wake up at night," he said, "the toilet is always a little bright, and the dragon is just sitting there. It says, 'Back again,' and I say, 'Yep,' and then I go pee. And when I say bye-bye, the dragon says bye-bye too. Then he goes back to sleep." I asked if it looked like the dragon from a cartoon he'd seen, trying to figure it out. He shook his head. "No, this one has long whiskers and scales. No wings, but it does float." About 2 weeks later, we were fishing at the harbor when suddenly he brought the dragon up again. He said the night before had been different. The dragon wasn't in the toilet last night, so I peed by myself. But when I came out, it was on the hallway ceiling. Apparently the dragon had grown much bigger. The hallway ceiling is narrow. So he said the dragon was twisting and bending along it, wedged into the space. I said, "Oh, you're here again, and you got big." And the toilet dragon said, "Yeah, a lot's been going on." And when my son asked if it wasn't staying in the toilet anymore, it told him, "Starting tomorrow, I'll be back in the toilet again." My son is now 4. He still goes to the toilet by himself at night. Sometimes I do ask him if the dragon is still there, and he always says yes. I still haven't seen it myself, though. But when I mentioned this story online once, some people told me something interesting. In older folk beliefs, toilets aren't just dirty places, they're considered boundary spaces between worlds, and snakes and dragons are often connected to water, protection, and household fortune. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just my son's imagination. Or maybe there really is a small white dragon sitting on top of our toilet tank every night, or hanging out in the hallway. Either way, I catch myself looking for it there sometimes. Because every now and then, when he comes back from the bathroom at night, I still hear him whisper, "Bye-bye," to someone in the hallway. Hi, Jay here. If you listened to the end and through that last story, thank you very much. That was a story about a dragon in a toilet. This was all a product of the Viewer Suggestions live stream, and you guys make that happen, so keep coming with your crazy suggestions. Keep an eye on the community posts tab. That's where you'll see updates of when I'm going to go live again, but wow. Let's see if we can get another one like that. Bye-bye, Toilet Dragon. Bye-bye, Jay Nightmares.